Great. So, welcome to Active Travel Cafe on the 28th of January 2025. Tonight we've got Christian Wolmar, the author, journalist, and commentator on all forms of transport. Railways is his speciality, and tonight he'll be talking about railways and their links to active travel for us. And first, as ever, we'll start off with the news from where you are. And who do we have with news? David Cox from the West Midlands.
Hi, I've got some good news for once from the West Midlands, or quite good news anyway. We had a new mayor, Labour Mayor Richard Parker, elected a Metro Mayor in May, and he's finally got his act together to appoint a sort of replacement for Adam Tranter, who was the next and strongly backed by the previous mayor, active travel commissioner. Anyway, we've seen the announcements this week. Matt MacDonald has been made commissioner for, it's called road safety, and Becky Marston has been made commissioner for active travel, I think mainly in terms of encouraging people to choose walking and cycling and wheeling as a way of getting about. They're both very respected people in the West Midlands. Matt has spoken at Active Travel Cafe about the Better Streets for Birmingham campaign, which has been passionate, uncompromising, and really turned the dial on the commitment of politicians and the police to doing something about road deaths and serious injuries. So he'll be a powerful appointment. Becky Marston used to work for, call it, the Cyclist Touring Club way back as one of the early cycling development officers. She's very good. She's also worked for the Active Wellbeing Society, and I've been involved in both. So I think she'll be really good, but they're only one day a week and they have limited powers. I mean, imagine how many people you can meet in one day a week in a year. I think there'll be less of a focus on street design, on infrastructure, something that Adam Tranter was very good and uncompromising on. It means that's going to be left to the boroughs and cities to sort themselves out. We'll see what happens on that. But I'm impressed with the two people who've been appointed. That's a good thing. The other good thing I found out today is another expert group. It's amazing how long it takes to set up two commissioners and one expert group. I mean, we've lost a fair proportion of a term of office, really. But a journey expert group, which is people experts on all sorts of travel, and Christian may know about this, has been set up. And Phil Jones, who auditioned last week on the Active Travel Cafe, is one of the experts appointed. I don't know who the others are. I know they met today. I'm assuming there'll be a press release this evening or tomorrow. So that's the news from the West Midlands. Thank you. I'll lower my hand when I can find a way of doing it.
Okay, David, thanks very much. Some good and some wait and see news there. Rob from Worcester. Let's see.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having me again. This is a follow-up from an announcement previous Active Travel Cafe with Chris Boardman about the Global Bike Bus Summit. So Worcester is hosting the Global Bike Bus Summit in April. We finalised. Whoops. Peter, would you mind? Sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback. That's Peter Barnett. I don't know. Peter. Thank you. Sorry. Hard to talk when my own voice is coming back at me. Thanks, Robin. So yeah, just to say, we've kind of finalised plans, and we want to invite everybody to Worcester. I think I did this on the last session to talk about bike buses and the power of bike buses as a kind of campaign tool. We've got a really exciting kind of group of people coming, including here you go, I'll show you this picture, which might make it a bit clearer. Not to give Phil another shout out, but Phil is going to come and chat about infrastructure and inclusive infrastructure in particular. We've got people coming from the US, from Canada, from all over Europe. And we've had quite a lot of interest from bike bus leaders across the UK as well. And we'll also be having children who take part in bike buses kind of share their experiences. One of the things that we're really keen to do is talk a lot, and Worcester has a lot of experience of this, about how bike buses are a really effective campaign tool for us. They give us a legitimacy with local decision makers that we've really struggled with to get otherwise, and also they help massively in terms of diversifying our activist group and our activist community. So I think they, you know, as a tool, they're really brilliant. And so we've got a dedicated session for campaigners who might be interested in bike buses, you know, and want to learn a bit more about our experience there. So that's happening on the Thursday afternoon. All the details are here. I'll find a way to share this in the chat. I might just put the Bike Worcester website in. If you've got any questions, get in touch. But it's going to be awesome. We had our first booking today from Canada. So that's, you know, so we've got a really great reach. So if you've got any questions or you'd like to come along, I think there's quite a few people here who are already booked, so which is really exciting. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rob. Adrian.
Yeah, thank you. I thought I'd just say a little bit about something that's been in the news rather than the news itself. People may have heard of a place called California Crossroads, which has had some pretty innovative work done on it over the last year or so. I'll just quickly share a picture. And this has made it to GB News yesterday, BBC News today, across the south of England. It's a pretty unloved junction that previously had 2 mini roundabouts in the middle of a village centre, which about 5-6 years ago, the local community decided they wanted something that was more of a shared space, a lot more pleasant. And so the design, which hopefully you can see on the screen, was agreed and took a long time to implement, got delayed by the pandemic, like lots of things. Went in about 4 months ago now, and has caused quite a lot of controversy with some people locally. I have to say, I think most people who think the way the people on this call would see this as a great innovation and a nice new centre for the village. But the absence of conventional mini roundabout marking, conventional stop lines, conventional zebra crossings is causing quite a lot of controversy. It's part of a big scheme that was done to replace all the sewage in the area, all the lighting in the area. And so overall, it's cost about £5 million of developer contributions to do this. And it's outraging quite a few people who like to be outraged. So it's called California Crossroads in Wokingham in Berkshire. I'll drop a link on the chat to the BBC article on it. And if you're interested in innovative road spaces and shared spaces and how people react to them sometimes, you might like to have a look. I can take questions if that's appropriate, either now or directly, whatever works for people.
No, we'll just carry on through the news if we can, but that's interesting to see that, Adrian. Karen, good to see you there. I know you're going to tell us a bit about the all-party parliamentary group's social justice initiative.
Is now the right time to do that?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. Yes, I was. I got an email at the end of November, completely out of the blue, that just said, "Dear Karen, would you like to come and talk? You know, you're invited to give evidence at the all-party parliamentary group for walking and cycling's inquiry into active travel and social justice. Full stop." You know, and that was it. And I initially thought it might be a phishing email or a joke from somebody. So I sent quite a tentative email back going, yeah, sort of, can you tell me a little bit more? And it took a week or two, and then I got an email back from Tom Cohen, and I was like, oh, okay, this is legit. And it was an invite to go along to Parliament and put forward the voice of young people and children who are sometimes not thought of in the planning process or in investment and that sort of thing. And the reason I got asked is because I'm the founder of CycleSprog, which is a website all about cycling with children and is aimed at parents. And we very much try and encourage people to cycle from an everyday perspective and also from a leisure perspective, because we firmly believe if you can get children cycling really young, then they'll turn into adults who cycle as well. So I've suddenly found myself in this really strange situation. I live up in Cumbria and I had to go down to London, and it was all done rather quickly. I think we got the brief on the Thursday or the Friday, and then the session was a week the following Monday. So it was all rather quick to pull together our responses. And the session, there was myself from Cycle Sprog, there was Age UK, the Black Riders Association, Cycle Sisters, Living Streets, the Healy Hub, the Bike Project, Transport for All, and Wheels for Wellbeing. So there were 9 of us. And we were each given a different brief. We were split into 3 and given different briefs around what was stopping certain groups from doing active travel. And the session was attended by 3 Labour MPs, a Lib Dem MP, and then a Green peer and a Conservative peer. And my worry had been that it was going to be a bit like the post office inquiry and I was going to be grilled, but it wasn't. It was completely the other way almost. They were really looking for advice from us. And I really focused in on the fact that our roads are designed to move people around from A to B in a motor vehicle and not from not in any other way, which really impacts young children or young people and children. And that we need to start reviewing how we choose to prioritise our road space, that as a parent, the most precious thing in the world is your child, and therefore it's such a difficult decision to allow people, for people to actually allow their child to ride on the road or to ride with them, and that in order to get that change that they're looking for, they really need to think about how to create those safe spaces, and that it all comes back to infrastructure. The main message that we were getting back, unfortunately, was that there's no budget. So the question kept coming back to what can we do that doesn't involve a huge amount of money? So we also talked about things like school streets, and then linking into what we've just heard about Worcester, about bike buses and things like that. Obviously, bike buses, in an ideal world, we wouldn't need them because everybody would be able to cycle safely individually, but things like that. And I also showed, talking to them about how when these interventions are put in place, people are willing to cycle with their children, or even just specific weeks, like when we have Cycle to School Week or the big scoot the big wheel and scoot to school. These things really see a change in attitude. So it's not that there's not the appetite for people to cycle to school, it's that the environment isn't correct for them. At the end, we were given an opportunity to then just say what else that they could do. They sort of said, right, we're here, what would you like us to do? So I just listed off a whole load of things that I think everybody on this call would want. And I just read off a whole long list of things, everything from, presumed liability, funding to maintain cycle paths, bringing up all cycle infrastructure to the standards of LTM 120, low traffic neighbourhoods, congestion charges, all sorts of things. So I just went for it because I thought, right, I've got you all here, I'm going to do it. My advice to anybody who gets asked to do this in the future is that if you do get a chance to speak to the other people who are talking, it's really good, because we didn't do that. And actually, a lot of us kept saying the same thing, and we actually ran out of time. So actually, if we'd been a little bit more savvy and said, right, we're covering this bit, you're covering that bit, it might have sped things up a little bit. And there were some voices there who had some really specific concerns, who maybe didn't get things as over as clearly because we were talking about more general aspects as well. So that would be my advice if you actually got to do it. Anybody who's interested, we actually off the back of that had to produce a report as well. So I'll drop a link in the chat to the article, which has got a link in it as well. So if anybody's interested. The final report comes out, I think it's about the 24th of March. So they're collating everything and then they'll be actually writing a report around it as well.
Great. Thanks very much, Karen. That's a really interesting report. Really interesting initiative. Glad that they are doing that and look forward to the report. Perhaps we'll get somebody in to talk about it here. Okay, we've got about 2 minutes left before we'll go to Christian. So Dave from Scotland and Ruth from Chiswick. Dave, away you go.
Thanks. A couple of very quick points. I'll not go into any detail because I'm looking forward to hearing Christian. And the details and links are in the blog on our website at spokes.org.uk. But firstly, the Scottish Government has got this very bold target to reduce car kilometres 20% by 2030. Everyone thought it was impossible, but the Scottish Government has just published research which they commissioned showing that it is possible, but they've kept this research pretty quiet. Anyway, you can find the links on our website. The second point is regarding the Scottish budget. and they've done something rather sneaky this year. In the past, we've always had a budget line called active travel. This year, they have made it a budget line called active and sustainable travel. And it includes a bus fund and includes other unspecified things. And so the amount actually allocated to active travel is unknown. So you can find it on the website. Thanks very much.
Okay, that is a cheeky move on the budget. The report I am super interested to see. I'm sure lots of people here will be. So if you've got a link, that's terrific. And Ruth.
So, very quickly, and it's really to ask for advice for people to put in the chat. So Hounslow, which, as you know, I always think is brilliant, have just put in what they think is a safe way to cross what is a wide mouth of a road, because people have been saying it's dangerous, but they've left, I'm sure those of you will understand, it's a very wide mouth still with a big curve, which was kind of very popular in the 80s. They've put a pedestrian island in the middle, and they've not yet put a zebra crossing in. And I've said, but surely it must be a raised table straight across and narrow the entrance. And they say that it's been passed by TfL and in conjunction with Active Travel England, which would worry me hugely, because I thought all design standards now were to narrow road and side road entrances, exits, and make sure that people can cross the shortest most possible and without having to stop in the middle. So any help, any advice, that'd be marvellous. Thank you.
Okay, answers in the chat, please, to Ruth. Gary, is it a quick one? You've got a hand up. Don't wince like that. Is it a valuable one? That's more important. Gary's not saying anything. Right, we'll switch to Christian then. Gary, you've missed your chance. Okay, right. Christian Wolmar, journalist, author, commentator, host of the Calling All Stations podcast, and here tonight to talk about trains, trains of bikes, trains of walking, trains and the government, and where we are going. Over to you, Christian.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm honoured to be here in front of such an illustrious group of people. I was just talking before. I know most about railways, but and that's what I mostly write about. But I've been active in terms of active travel for quite a number of years, and I was the founder of Labour Cycles, and I was on the board of the LCC for a long time. I've cycled everywhere around London for the past 40 or 50 years, really, even more than that, probably. I hate to say how much. And a little personal point here, as a result of that, I am very fit. And I recently had a hospital procedure where they first of all said, "Oh, at your age, we can't do this. You're not supposed. You're too old." And then I said, "But I've just done a half marathon and I cycle everywhere and blah blah." I said, "Yeah, you do look pretty fit. Yeah, we'll do this." So because of that, I had a much better procedure than I would have done otherwise. And so I think that sort of thing is very important. And it should be the basis of policy, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But just to say a little bit more about myself, I have written a lot of books, about 20 books, and not just about railways. I've written a couple of policy books, one of which is Are Transports, Are Trams Socialist? To which, spoiler alert, the answer is no. The book is largely about the fact that Britain has no transport policy, has never had a transport policy. And I'll come back to that subject in a minute too, with some disappointment. And I wrote another book about driverless cars a few years ago, which is probably the least active form of travel ever imagined. And this also is quite important for the current situation, because clearly the book I wrote was suggesting that driverless cars are not going to happen, and that they are really an invention too far. But they are being pushed, and they've been pushed obviously by the Elon Musks of this world, but also government ministers, and I've seen this on both sides of the house. Government ministers tend to like these techie things, and they kind of say, "Oh yes, well, driverless cars are coming, and we have to deal with it, and so on." And the fact is, driverless cars aren't coming. I mean, there's just lots of barriers. I won't go into it now, but anybody who's interested can either email me or read the book. But it's again one aspect of transport policy that we have to be wary of and fight about. And I want to just bring you a bit up to date with the current government, which is a source of some disappointment. But you know, we must remain optimistic. When they first got in, I was very pleased that they had said and talked about the fact that transport is not just about transport. It's always an argument I've used, but it's about the environment, it's about sustainability, and it's about health, and it's about the economy and everything else. And these things, to those of us, and I should think everybody on this board, we know all that, and we've understood that for a long time. But governments seem to fail to understand that. But it was quite. I bumped into Chris Boardman at the Labour Party conference, and apparently just taught Louise Haig, you know, how to use an e-bike, and she was very enthusiastic, and she made some good speeches in favour of those sort of concepts that I've just talked about the importance of cycling for health, and how, you know, if you really want to get down NHS waiting list, one of the ways to do that is to get people more active and walking and cycling, and even using public transport, which we know is more healthy than hopping in your car and in your drive and driving to your destination and barely walking more than 50 yards. So so there did seem to be quite a good start. And then I talked to Chris at the time. He said, well, we've heard a lot of good words, but you know, we await the action. And he said, I'm very pleased with the way it's going, but, and I must say the but has got a bit bigger lately with you know, discussion. We're going to hear tomorrow. This talk is probably a day too early, because tomorrow Rachel Reeves is going to give this big speech, and you know, there'll certainly be some airport expansions in it. And there's been some noise about road schemes, notably the Lower Thames Crossing, which I gave a talk on this at Labour Party Eastern Region on Saturday in Southend. And there is certainly some support within the Labour Party, although there's probably much more opposition than support. But it is really a kind of reversion. Initially, they scrapped a whole lot of road schemes and said they're unsustainable, notably the Stonehenge one. And now they seem to be kind of retreating on that to some extent. And funny enough, I wrote a pamphlet, the first sort of booklet I ever wrote, which I just dug up just now by chance, called Unlocking the Gridlock, the Key to a New Transport Policy, which I think was something like 1996. And I wrote in it, this is an exciting moment. Now that it is widely accepted that the construction of more roads is not a solution to the increase in traffic, then other, more environmentally friendly policies have to be developed. Well, my God, we're still having that argument. I mean, it is so unbelievable. This is a very depressing field sometimes to get into, and I don't want to give an entirely negative talk here, because you know, a lot positive has happened in the intervening 20 odd years, nearly 30 years. But it is unbelievably frustrating that we rehearse the same arguments time and time again and come up against the same buffers and bollards kind of time and time again. It just it can, you know, get to one. And certainly when I heard Rachel Reeves talking about roads and airports and God knows what else, you just think, you know, have they, you know, when will they ever learn? And so on railways, I do want to talk a little bit about the railways, and then I'll finish off with some thoughts about where we can go. On railways, they are making progress. They basically passed legislation, which was amazingly fast, about being able to take back the franchises in-house without waiting for them to fail. That was the key point. I mean, they took 4 of the 17 or 18 franchises back in-house before that, but only because they were failing either financially or from a performance point of view. And this legislation, which was rushed through, I mean, amazingly fast, and passed in the summer by Louise Haig, and they now can take over the franchises. They got a program for taking over the franchises. But will this make a difference? Well, I think it will. The creation of a unified body, Great British Railways, will enable more coherent and a more strategic approach to the railways. And indeed, to give a good example, you know, it is possible that GBR might mandate better cycling kind of facilities on the trains or at stations or whatever. It would have the power to kind of do those sort of things that is difficult to coordinate 18 different train operators doing that. So there is some potential there, but there is also some risk, because the Labour government has set a lot of store by this. You know, it's been quite a prominent part of their policies, and they've got to show some improvements. You know, some of the parts of the railway network have not performed well at all. And even one of the franchises that they took over, the Northern franchise, has not been doing very well, although apparently it's a bit better than the last 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe some of you might kind of be able to update on that. But I do worry that if they renationalize the railways and then the railways are not kind of performing better, and they haven't introduced innovations like a more coherent ticketing system, and they haven't kind of got a more customer-friendly service and so on, I worry that it will be seen as a failure by government, because ultimately governments have always been responsible for the railways, and even in this, you know, near 30-year period of privatization, essentially, you know, it's been ministers standing at the dispatch box who have to defend the case, defend the performance of the railways. So in terms of sustainable transport, I do think that before we get too negative, we have to celebrate the progress that has been made. And of course, as a Londoner, I've benefited from that probably much more than most of you, in terms of, you know, London has been transformed. I mean, I really still remember cycling in London where you'd say hello to every fellow cyclist because they were so rare. And it's difficult to, it would have been difficult to imagine that we've got to where we've got with kind of streams of cyclists, kind of big cycle lanes, and still improvements happening, never quite as fast as we would like, and so on. And there are some other places across the country where I've seen that there have been improvements, and there's the general kind of feeling that, you know, cycling is good. But there is still this fundamental intellectual failure. And I think if that's somewhere where all of you should possibly be trying to campaign on, and trying to kind of pull together ideas, and also a place where you can get angry, because God, I get angry sometimes about this, and which I think a bit of anger doesn't do any harm, is getting across the notion that what I always say, transport is not about transport. Cycling is not about cycling. It's about health. It's about well-being. It's about, 101 other things. It's about kids, for Christ's sake, being able to kind of cycle to school. I mean, look at Holland. Compare Holland with ours, or certainly compare it with America. And always remember this, that the cycling kind of spread of cycling, and that it's kind of the way that's been inculcated within the Dutch culture has been a political thing. It's not because Holland is flat and so on, and they always cycle and so on. Cycling, could have been wiped out, as it was in China. 30 years ago in China, everybody cycled. It was the way everybody got around, and the same thing could have happened in Holland, but it was politics. It was politics that kind of stopped it. It was the campaign against kids being killed, and much more widely than that. You only have to read anything from the Dutch campaigns. I'm sure you've all heard this before, but it is very important to reiterate, it's all about politics. I think I'll end on that point.
Right, thank you, Christian. It is all about politics. What a point to end on. And we have some good questions coming in. Bob, I see somebody's put a question in the chat, and then Zoom has lost it because Zoom does these things. I'll try and find it a bit later, but if Bob wants to put it in the Q&A, we'll find it again. I've got two questions of my own that I'll start us off on. We'd love to see more people taking trains rather than driving their cars around for a starter. How much capacity actually is there on the railway network for that?
There's quite a lot, and things have of course shifted. So usage is about at 85% of the numbers, of the revenue of before COVID, but it's at nearly 100% of the usage. So there has been a transformation in the way people are using trains. Season ticket sales have plummeted. Rush hour travel is no longer strap hanging so much. So it's much more spread about, and of course that is advantageous both for the people who are building infrastructure for the railways, because it's that extra bit that they have to cope with the rush hour that was very costly. But it's also good for travellers, and filling those seats is off peak is really beneficial. The trouble is the railways have not responded to that quickly enough. So there's still ridiculous peak kind of penalties to travel at peak times, which are far in excess of what is needed, and that deters travellers. So I have taken trains that kind of leaving London at 8:30 in the morning, which are 3/4 empty because they're so expensive, and some business is paying for me, so that's all right. But the railways have not yet adapted to this. Again, this is something where one would hope that Great British Railways will adapt to this new situation. There are also some spaces on the tracks. There's too many 2-car or 4-car trains rattling around, particularly on cross country, where there's often just one train of 4 or 5 coaches has replaced the trains that used to have 9 coaches, and some of those services are very, very overcrowded. But by and large, there's a ticketing issue here, by the way, that some of the ticket, so the train operating companies, when you try and buy a ticket, and they say, and although you're buying an off-peak ticket, which is valid on the off-peak train, you click on the particular train you want, and it says no tickets available on this train. And that's because there's no guarantee of a seat on it, although there's always a couple of carriages that are generally available to walk on people. And that's a completely dishonest thing to do. It puts people off from traveling on those trains, when it's just not true. There is space on those trains. It's just that it's quite a full train. But so, there's very few instances where you can't get on the train you want.
Right. And then if GBR is going to be making things happen, when can we start? When is it going to be there in a form we can start lobbying it for bike carriages and so forth?
Okay, the first bit of legislation was passed quite quickly. The second bit of legislation is required to create GBR. The first bit didn't create GBR. It just enabled the franchises to be taken over. So I've spoken to senior people in the Department of Transport, as I say as a journalist, and they are confident that it will be passed by October. But even then, it will certainly take 6 to 9 months to create anything. And we don't really know what its structure is and what its relationship with Network Rail will be, and so on. But it will be a bit slow. I mean, I think it'd be very lucky to have a GBR happening in the autumn of 2026. It's probably going to be longer than that. But there will be a shadow GBR, which you will be able to lobby on all aspects of this. And it will be very important, actually, for people to do that, because when it's created, you'll have already have set certain kind of ways of operating, and so it will be worth kind of banging on their door before they're actually officially created.
Right. Thanks for that. Let's break it up, and there's a couple of people with hands up, so we'll get some questions from them. Kate, first of all, from Stevenage.
Hi, Christian. It was great, thank you. Very ironically, I have just been passed at my desk here by an autonomous cleaner. It's like an industrial equivalent of a robo thing that's trundling around the office, and those of us still here are thinking, what is it doing? Brilliant.
Like mowing your lawn, one of the
exactly that
lawn mower things.
Right. Exactly that. I've been watching lots of Rory Sutherland talks recently, and he makes really good points around rail network is like a road network with terrible PR. And that if we thought differently about rail transport, he gives examples. He told the chief exec of HS2 that you didn't need to build HS2, you just need to change the rail ticketing, because if everyone buys an advance ticket because it's too expensive to get a regular ticket, you arrive 40 minutes before your train because it's advance ticket, only that train. If you let people pay an extra £5 to go on an earlier train where there is a seat, they get there half an hour earlier, they're happier, and you haven't had to build a railway. It's a slightly sarcastic point, but there is a good point around what we price and what we value.
It's too late now, I'm afraid. I was always opposed to HS2. And,
absolutely.
You can't leave a 2-mile viaduct over Cold Valley and a 10-mile tunnel underneath the Chilterns to Moulder. I'm afraid that you have to spend good money after bad. Just otherwise we would be a laughing stock of the world, and also we'd get nothing for it. We might as well get a railway for it now.
Yeah, I agree, but I think the point he's making is it's about media and perception, and that we see a lot of these things around how people perceive it. And he said, if we redesign trains so that it was easier, to walk up and cycle up and get some of the interchange work, some doesn't. For example, if you had a seat on a train and you had no view, the seats were down the middle facing each other, and the standing points down the side with a nice little thing you could perch on, like you do in coffee shops, and a stand for your iPad or your newspaper or your book, and a really nice view. People will actually be probably happy standing. We know when people have got the travel time information. The thing you don't have as a car driver is certainty of timing. Actually, you have quite good certainty on the rail network. It tells you how many minutes your train is going to be late. You don't have that as a driver. And that those mismatches, do you think some of this is around perception and how things have been presented, rather than necessarily what it actually is? There seems to be a PR issue.
Undoubtedly. I mean, the example I often use is that, I probably use the trains, 100 times a year or something. And 95% of my journeys are on time and fine, and very few of them aren't. And there is a great exaggeration about, a double exaggeration. There's an exaggeration about how late trains are, but there's also an exaggeration about how reliable cars are.
Yes.
How many times
Yeah.
does one get delayed by cars? I think there is a whole subtext here of the way that we perceive transport, and it's partly a news desk phenomenon that bad-tempered news editors who've had a bad journey on the train at 8 o'clock in the morning will kind of try and ensure that their journalists write lots of kind of anti-rail stories and so on. And I do think that the railways get a bad press. For the past 25 odd years, since the demise of British Rail, of course, there's been nobody who represents the railways. There's nobody to say, actually, we're doing rather better than you think. I mean, the ministers have been absent. There's no organizational body really, or there's something called the Rail Delivery Group, but I mean, it's not a kind of prominent body. So nobody has kind of sold the railways to the public. And I think that's been a great kind of lacuna.
No, all the apps.
Okay,
You need, if a train's late, you need 75 apps to make it work. And you've got your train operator and the next train operator's app and the train operator after that who's going to sit on app and National Rail. And I think that's part of the issue, including the confidence of cycle parking at your destination, even if you can get on the train. It's joined upness, always the issue. Thank you.
Good, thank you. And let's have Mark's question from Brighton.
Thanks. Hi, Christian. Just a couple of things, actually. You mentioned the Rail Development Group, and they had the cycle working group for some time, which used to have meetings and so on about cycle parking.
I used to be on it.
Yes, I know. That seemed to have stopped. It seems to have stopped happening. I mean, and it seemed to have gone more atomized. So that was the first question about maybe more linkages, not just with cycling, but having something more coherent. And would Great British Railway take on that? Do you expect that they might take on that responsibility again? And the second question, just moving on to slightly geeky rolling stock issues, if I'm allowed to do that.
We had other people who want to ask some very geeky rolling stock issues.
It's an exemplar. The Thameslink route, the 700s. They were designed by the DFT and foisted on Thameslink. They weren't designed by the operator for the use for which were going to be used. Hence, only half of them have Wi-Fi. They don't have tables, etc., etc. Is that sort of issue still going to be prevalent? That the Treasury will impose a design and somebody else will then have to end up squeezing it to a route? You mentioned two-car trains rattling along. Will they end up still having inappropriate rolling stock because somebody else has built it for them and they've got to take it or have nothing new?
Now, all this is speculative because we don't really know what GBR, the shape of GBR, but intimations I get certainly are that GBR would decide on the procurement of rolling stock, and so it would make decisions. Now, there's a big difference between the DFT doing that, which has the Treasury leaning on them, and a semi-independent organisation like GBR doing that, which would have a lot of railway expertise. So that might be a positive thing. And in terms of kind of pushing for the railways, I do think something that Heidi Alexander said in her recent speech was quite positive about that, kind of basically implying that yes, GBR would act as a kind of sponsor of the railways, as kind of batting for the railways, and British Rail did that to some extent. British Rail had the most fantastic advertising campaigns. Far better than anything we've seen since. So that again would be a positive development if whoever chairs GBR, whoever runs it or whatever, is prepared to bat for the railways and to kind of ensure that the sort of mistakes that were made in the ghastly Thameslink trains are not made again. Actually, the worst example is the Hitachi trains with where you try and where you have to kind of hang your bicycle up by the front wheel, which is not good for the front wheel. Certainly not good for anybody's back.
I've got a photo of one. I was on one 24 hours ago, and I've got a photo.
Okay, we're going to have to not get into specific trains. I feel
how to do it. No, but I tell you that certainly I can just about do it with my quite heavy bike, but my wife can, who is 5 foot, certainly can't kind of lift her bike up to hook on it, and either has to ask somebody or leave it kind of hanging halfway outside. I mean, this is just, and Boris Johnson, to his credit, did actually address this issue, but nothing has happened about it. So again, we hope that those sort of mistakes will not be made, and that there will be input of an organisation like the cycling group that I was on for a while.
Okay, that's great. I mean, that would be a good way to get input in. Now I'm going to go to Bob, who's patiently asked the question on in the chat a while ago, if he's going to ask the same question, and this is going to take us up quite a long level, and I think we should also link this to some people definitely realizing that there is lots of congestion, and as we build more houses, just building roads and having more traffic is not the solution. But Bob, do you want to launch your question?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to say hello, everybody. I'm not normally here live because I'm away, but I've got the lurgy, so I'm stuck at home. And nice to say hello to everybody. Also say hello to Christian, who I first met in 1992 when my book was launched. Proof that us old gits carry on because we're cycling regularly. So, and he's also worked with Road Danger Reduction Forum in the past on a number of things. So thanks to him. And what I'm doing, and other people like Ian Walker, is working on the cultural, ideological issues about what's called moto normativity or car culture, car supremacism. I think this is a really important area for activists and campaigners to get involved in, to understand the kind of background assumptions that everybody has about car use. Have you got any thoughts about that, about how we proceed, what we should do, what you think about that area generally?
Well, the culture, they're trying to change the culture.
Yeah. Well, understand what it is, and how it works.
I'm very disappointed by that, actually. I think Lou Haig was vaguely getting it. I'm not sure whether Heidi Alexander does, although she's a very. I mean, I've been very impressed with her in London, and she did do some good things there. But I think to some extent it has to come from the top. Obviously, Chris Boardman is the best kind of exponent of such a cultural change, isn't he? I mean, he's brilliant. I'm sure you've all heard him speak. I mean, he makes total sense. Also, where he's coming from is really important. The fact that he was a racing cyclist, but he comes from the bottom up, and he came to cycling from kind of commuting cycling or work cycling from a completely different place. Absolutely fascinating. But we need politicians to talk the talk about this, and we need some inspirational figures. We need people to be invited to conferences. We need people to go on TV and radio and emphasize the wider aspects of this. That's what I bang on about. I'm sorry if it sounds boring, but we tend sometimes to get stuck in how wide a cycling lane is. And whether a particular kind of route is particularly well designed, whereas we should be getting into the much wider issues. Why are our kids kind of obese? Why when we know that cycling prolongs lives, why are we not doing enough about it? Arguing at that kind of level up rather than on the nitty gritty. Of course, we need to work on the nitty gritty, and people need to ensure that there's good design down there. But I think that's the hope, is that there is some inspiration out there, some inspiring people out there to to talk the talk about it. You know, the Grimshaws of this world and the Boardmans of this world. You know, there are some people, but not enough.
Thanks.
It's yeah, very, very true, I think. And also emphasise the impact of not doing it. Ruth, you have a question about ticketing, I think.
Hello, Christian. Very nice to see you. Us old people do carry on cycling, don't we?
Oh,
I'm not quite
not
as old.
old, not old.
Yes, ticketing. One issue, of course, with some of the companies is that you cannot book your bike onto the train at the same time as booking the train ticket. So you have to book the train ticket and then hope you'll be able to get your bike on it. Is that going to be looked into? And of course, we do know that in Holland they do actually pay to put bikes on trains, whether it's 1 mile or 100 miles or kilometres. So I just wanted to explore that. And as 5 foot, I cannot hang my bikes, but the one LNER, I think, now do have 2 hanging and 2 on the deck, and you get specific seating just through the door and space for your bike luggage. So that's an improvement. Ticketing for the 2 together is what we really need.
Yes, again, that's just the sort of issue that might be possible to lobby GBR on. I mean, so there was a wider issue about ticketing. I mean, it's so complicated and so difficult, and I mean, I've come up with a plan about how to reorganize it. I think other people have come up with plans, and it is one of the missions, according to Heidi Alexander, of GBR. But and it will be a lot easier to do as GBR rather than having to satisfy 18 different train operating companies. So there is some hope for that. I do remember paying to take my bike on the train. I'm not sure we want to return to that route, although only on the basis that it might kind of incentivize them to make it easier.
Sorry, just to interrupt you really quickly. The problem with that, though, is often you'll find that you want to get a train, they will tell you there are no spaces, but when you go on that train, there are spaces because people have reserved, but because they don't pay, they then, and it's raining or whatever, they don't use them. So it might kind of make it all more formal.
Right. Okay. I must say a word on Eurostar there. I mean, Eurostar's bicycling policy is completely incomprehensible. I mean, I went to Brussels the other day, and there was a bike coming off the train, and I said, "Oh, I didn't realise that you could take trains." Oh, yes, you can take them to Brussels, but you can't take them to Paris. And they're trying to sort that out, but I mean, why? What they do about that? So there's somewhere to kind of somebody's door to bang on heavily. It's certainly Eurostars, which certainly needs some campaigning kind of to have some sort of rational policy. I've got no idea why there's lots of room on those trains. There's all sorts of nooks and crannies there where you could find they're 18 carriages long. You know, you could certainly do that. So that there is a slightly more fundamental issue, which is in Holland, they don't actually encourage you to take your bike on trains on the whole. They would rather you left them at the station and then had another bike at the other station. In an ideal world, I think that would be a good idea, but it's not really any good if you're just going on a one-off trip from London to York or something. But it's not necessarily can we ever encourage kind of hundreds of bikes on trains. That's not going to work, but we could certainly do a lot more to make it easier and better.
H, you have your hand up. Are you going to ask who do you talk to get cycle spaces in trains specified?
Well, I know the people who are doing it. I've actually got to do an input down to cross country. You'll know that I've got a lot of pictures on my Flickr feed of the fact that the hanging hooks pull out of the ceiling because they're not properly set up. The bikes swing around because they're not properly secured and bash into things. You measure the gap you're supposed to get the bike through. One measures 63 centimeters, when typically a bike has a.
Do you have a question for Christian?
And sundry other things. It's totally wrong. They're getting, I think it's 17 new Voyagers when Avanti get rid of the Voyagers, and they're going to Derby for refurbishment. I know the woman engineer who's responsible for the refurbishment program, but I need to get an input in because they're looking to find space. And this is a topic that we come up with. Moving freight. Some people may have heard of Jeff Screeton and Intercity Rail Freight. And he puts packages on trains at 125 mile an hour and gets them picked up by cycle logistics operators in London and various other places. We've had some amazing courier journeys to do this sort of thing.
Sorry, so what's your question, Dave?
Well, I want to know how we tackle getting this thing right. In 2014, we looked at the Hitachi design and told them what was wrong with it, and they ignored us. Then we had to come back and get it redesigned by LNER. It's a question of getting hold of the right people, getting into the right places, and saying when you are specifying stowage, and you do need stowage for bikes, we need stowage for wheelchair users and such like, and we need it done properly. And we can do it. People would be aware of real-time trains, where Tom Cairns actually shows you the train with the vehicle numbers on the real-time trains website.
Okay.
So there's expertise out there on how to design trains, cycle storage, and parcel storage. How do we get that to the people designing trains?
I think, at the risk of repeating myself, at the moment it is difficult to know whose door to knock on. I mean that the fragment, the worst aspect of the privatization of the railways, in a way, was the fragmentation of them, how they were split up between all these different companies and broken up, and the research department was ditched and so on. And there was no specific kind of input into that. I remember the guy who invented the student rail card told me that he did that in the days of British Rail. He worked for NUS at the time. He said within 10 weeks of him knocking on the door of British Rail with the idea for the student rail card, they were already starting selling them. And I mean, that's just extraordinary. And this whole idea that British Rail was slow and kind of ponderous and didn't do anything is completely misplaced. So, there is potential there if we get the right people at the head of GBR, that we'll be able to knock on their doors.
Do you think that applies to, so I'm picking up another question from the chat here, do you think that applies to ticketing as well? Is there a realistic chance of sorting out the complexity?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said about Heidi Alexander, she did say that, although she did say that one of the tasks of GBR was beginning to sort out the messages, which suggests that it's going to be a long task. I mean, I have a solution that I think I'll bore you with quickly. I think there ought to be a standard fare, which is the off-peak kind of return between any two places, and then you simply have trains that are more expensive, say 20 or 30% more expensive because they're very heavily used, and then you have trains that are 20 or 30% less, or even 50% less because they're hardly used. So you have a basic fare that everybody knows, and then you have a 20, 30% train that kind of adds a premium, and then you have cheaper trains that are better off. End of story. It seems to me to solve the whole thing, but whether, I've been punting this for a while, so if any of you want to take up that idea, by all means do. It seems like a perfect solution. Right.
And what about cycling facilities at stations? Martin Gibson here is saying, can we draw on the Dutch experience? And they've obviously had a lot of success, both allowing bikes on trains and having great cycle parking at stations. So a huge number of their train journeys connected to a bike ride.
I mean, that's something that has definitely improved over the years. Definitely. I mean, there used to be nowhere. And some stations are actually very good for this. This is Network Rail, right? I mean, Network Rail owns the station, even though it doesn't run the station. So again, there's a separation here because Network Rail owns and manages the 15 or 16 biggest stations in the country, the London Termini in Glasgow and Liverpool Lime Street and Piccadilly and New Street and so on. But it doesn't run the other ones. The other ones are run by the main train operating company, which uses that particular station. So there's a separation. So again, that is somewhere where by integrating the operations with the track and infrastructure, which is an absolute primary purpose of this whole reorganization, right? As well as renationalize the railways, it's to integrate the railways. And Heidi Alexander made that very clear in her speech. By doing that, again, you'll be able to mandate kind of policies where you say, well, if there's a throughput of 5,000 people a day at a particular station, it should have X numbers of cycle racks and so on. You could actually make a calculation to do that. So again, this is somewhere where the centralization of the organization will do a lot of good.
Okay. And Peter Corker, well, you've got your hand up there.
Hi, Christian. Sorry, I'm trying to see my camera on, but it's not allowing me. Apologies for that. I wonder what your thoughts are about the open access companies and what's going to happen to them, companies like Lumo, when the government effectively is creating a monopoly and may not like the competition from other companies that might offer lower fares than they do or can.
Oh, well, this is something I've just written a piece in my latest column in Rail Magazine, which those of you who are rail nerds can purchase or read on my website in a couple of months' time or a month or so time. So there's a conflict within the government here, because originally in the manifesto they said, oh yes, we really want to encourage open access, which is as you say, Lumo and Hull Trains and whatever. And there's several applications. There's application for train from Paddington to Carmarthen. There's trains from Euston to Rochdale and Euston to Stirling and Waterloo to Paynton, all kind of applications for open access services. And they do actually make it more difficult to have a coherent timetable. So even though they have been quite successful, and certainly the Hull Trains have been very successful, and Lumo has definitely added to the market. One can't deny that by running cheap trains, London to Scotland and stuff. They do add complexity for the regulators, and they would make it more difficult for GBR to have a coherent policy. So my article says, actually, First Group, which has sponsored many of these open access services, are actually being a bit miffed by the fact that while in the manifesto Labour was saying we're all in support of this, now Heidi Alexander wrote a letter a couple of weeks ago to the regulator saying, well, we're not quite sure about this because it's actually going to cause some problems about timetabling and strategy and whatever. So watch this space. I suspect they're not going to do away with the Lumos and Hull Trains of this world, but I suspect that some of these new operations might either not happen or will only happen in a very limited way.
Right, thank you. Great question. The problem with this, knowing enough about the economics, is that you can make so much money on the long runs. London to Edinburgh must be hugely profitable. In fact, I know that because I read it in Private Eye. Yes, that's profit that they can't be recycled into other routes.
Yeah, exactly. The open access operators can cream off. It's like when the buses were deregulated. So you've got lots of buses that on the main routes through Manchester or Sheffield or whatever, and yet the rest of the networks were neglected because they couldn't cross-subsidise. And I remember having a fierce argument with Brian Suter, who ran Stagecoach, about he thought that cross-subsidisation was immoral because you were charging some people on the buses higher fares than you would to kind of help people who were other bus users, and he thought that was immoral. I think it's kind of about equity, but there was quite a debate to be had there.
That's we're back to politics again, Christian. What a great the circle is complete. Great. I'm going to ask one more question in the chat and then we'll close up, which is, what are the chances for a HS2 cycle route. The question specifically
Right.
about Crewe, but the section near Crewe, but you can answer for any or
No,
all
no,
parts
there
of
is.
it.
Look, originally the HS2 was going to have a cycle route all along it.
It's the best part of the business case, if I remember.
It was, and that has somewhat died. But I do know that there are initiatives within Department for Transport to revive that and to have a long distance route that might not be exactly alongside HS2, but to have a long route from, say, Liverpool to Dover or something, and to advertise that and have a safe route of all that kind of all along the route. So again, watch this space and support any efforts towards that, because there is a possibility that will be revived. And I just want to apologize. I'm sorry about my lack of teeth. It's I'm in the midst of terrible treatment from the dentist, and I get my teeth back on Monday week, which I will look forward to enormously. But in the meantime, I look like a bit weird.
Okay, well that's
Sorry about that.
no, well, that's it all comes with age and wisdom.
And
thank you very much.
Drinking Ribena when you were
yes.
I drank Ribena for every day for 15 years when I was a child, and by the age of 17 I had no teeth left.
There are worse sins. Right, thank you very much, Christian. That was a hugely interesting, informative and wide-ranging discussion. I hope everyone's enjoyed that and learned something. And of course, to learn any more about it, we'd have to wait 10 years, and things tend to happen very slowly in terms of railway development. But in the active travel world, we're all quite used to that. Thank you again. Thank you all for coming. We will be back next week, same time, same place. And next week we'll have Jenny Rutherford from Leeds City Council, she is the Play Strategy Officer, and she'll be talking about some groundbreaking work they are doing to ensure that all the children in Leeds have a safe place to play, which is fantastic, and will hopefully not be in the middle of a zebra crossing. So I hope you've enjoyed the session, and hope to see you next week for that next great session. Bye all.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.